agenda today is what's new in Civil 3D 2019, though I will point out that I want to round out the conversation a bit for a number of reasons. First, in between the Civil 3D 2018 and 2019 releases, there were a number of updates, namely 2018.1 and 2, which included a few probably very useful items. They're kind of all over the place in terms of what they addressed or what they added to Civil 3D. So it'll be difficult to weave a narrative that sort of ties them all in together. Instead, I'll probably be jumping in and out of several drawings just to show you the different tools. And then items 2 through 7 are for Civil 3D 2019 specifically. All right. One important note before we move on, those of you who might be in versions of Civil 3D 2018 and 2017 and earlier, if you've already migrated to 2018, you'll remember, or you should know that Civil 3D 2018 isn't backwards compatible with earlier versions. However, Civil 3D 2019 and 2018 are interchangeable. I added a little, footnote there, with the exception of one of the tools that I'm about to show you, which is the vertical curve by high or low point. You can exchange drawings between the two versions. So if you're in 2018, you can still use 2019 and back and forth within your firm without any particular issues. So we'll jump directly into what was introduced into Civil 3D 2018.1. And if I didn't emphasize this earlier, I probably should have just stated it. All the 2018.1 and .2 updates are included in the 2019 release, right? So that's why it's important for you, if you didn't go through several of those updates, to note that these are already included as well, which is part of the reason that I'm touching upon them during today's 2019 presentation. So looking down this list, there's a couple of just individual items that really sort of enhance the way workflows work in Civil 3D. Some of these come directly from the idea station on the Civil 3D forums, where people post ideas that they think would improve Civil 3D, whether it's an addition of a new tool, a refinement of an existing tool, or simply a better workflow. Autodesk does listen, and they do integrate these changes into their updates. So items 1 and 2 are a result of that, right? The ability to override glyph toggles and to launch the infrastructure parts editor directly from Civil 3D. With 2018.1, Civil 3D gained the ability to export alignment data directly to IFC. There was one item, item number 4, the ability to reconnect networks. There was an issue. I never saw it in the wild, and I never had any clients reach out, but it was a known issue that certain clients experienced and certain end users experienced, where if you upgraded Civil 3D drawings with pipe networks, all your structures and pipes got disconnected, right? Which is a nightmare, because if you don't have an easy way to reconnect a large network, you'd have to do a lot of that work manually. So that tool is introduced. And then the rest are just, I would say 5 and 6 are just enhancements to existing workflows, right? The ability to reference a template and have several options about what you include rather than including everything. And then last but not least, just improvements to how projections and crossings works in section view. The new tool for 2018.1 is the roadway rehab workflows, which I'll take you through a situation on getting started with a rehab corridor and all the different tool sets that are part of that workflow. All right, so what I'll do right now is I'm going to go ahead and just jump into Civil 3D, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the new tools, right? So I just started off with a simple drawing. I have an alignment here, and I have a couple of different warning symbols. The symbols that you see me hover over tell me exactly what kind of changes I've made. So Civil 3D has several warning symbols associated with various ways that you can edit information in the drawing, and or it reports information that's non-standard. So in the case of this text over here, you can see that as I hover over the text, I'm getting information that the text has been overridden. As I hover over this particular symbol, it will indicate that the minimum radius is violated based on the design speed. Now, in older versions of Civil 3D, and you're going to see me do this quite often, where I'll point out what the change was, right? Because it's hard to get an appreciation for what's been introduced if you didn't know how it worked before. But in prior versions of Civil 3D, there were a couple of ways to disable glyphs. Globally, you could go to the Civil 3D options and go to the AEC editor and uncheck drafting solution tips, and they would effectively turn them off, right? With alignment data in particular, right? If you were just concerned about these, you could also disable that in the alignment style. So if you access the alignment style, you could also turn off warning symbols. But there was no effective way of turning off these particular text override symbols. So what was introduced in 2018.1 is the ability to toggle on and off these glyphs. So you can see I can go ahead and go to my Annotate tab and simply toggle override glyph to hide it, and then turn it back on to show it. All right, so pretty straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and just jump over to, actually, while I'm in the same drawing, I'll point out the second item. In previous versions of Civil 3D, if you wanted to launch the infrastructure editor, right, the parts editor that allows you to create structures in, let's say, a product like Inventor and then migrate them over into Civil 3D and InfraWorks, you would have to go to your Windows icon, go to Program Files, find the shortcut, and launch it. Alternatively, you could create a desktop shortcut, but in essence, you were launching it from outside of the application. So what was introduced is the ability to simply launch that directly through the Create Design tab inside of Civil 3D. That brings up this dialog window where it allows you to go ahead and create or import parts from the Inventor to place inside of InfraWorks or Civil 3D. All right. Go ahead and open up another drawing real quick. The other item, which was item 4, was the issue that I pointed out related to situations where if you opened up or upgraded your Civil 3D drawing, if you were examining your networks, you would notice that all your networks became disconnected. So for example, if I select this structure, I right-click and I go to Structure Properties, you're going to notice that there are no connected pipes, despite the fact that if I'm simply looking at this and knowing that I designed this in Civil 3D, that all those pipes should in fact be connected to that structure. So what was added into Civil 3D was the ability to reconnect network, right? You can get that through the Modify tab, and you can also just enter in the command at the command line, Reconnect Network, and it's global. What it'll do is it'll reconnect every pipe network or pipe end structure that it can in the drawing. So going ahead and pressing Enter, you'll see that in the dialog or the text window, I have an indication that 44 pipes in the network were reconnected. And if I now select that same structure and go to its properties, you'll see that the connected pipes are indeed the 3 pipes that we see in the drawing, right? So that resolved an issue that affected a good number of users where upon upgrading, they lost connections to their pipes. Let me go ahead and close that out just to keep my interface nice and clean. And I'll go ahead and open up my next drawing. My next drawing has to do with reference styles. Now, I'll point out, and again, I'll try to be as thorough as I can, indicating where tools were introduced in Civil 3D. And, because there's so many different aspects of Civil 3D that change throughout each product cycle, you may not know, but you can reference Civil 3D styles from other drawings or templates into your current drawings. What this enables you to do is have a workflow where you have one master template or several master template files that house all your styles, and then rather than have to import them manually into Civil 3D or simply import them in bulk using the import tool, you can selectively reference them, right? That enables you to change the master and have those changes reflected in each drawing that uses it as a reference. Now, this tool isn't the new addition, but what is the ability to control the information that gets managed, right? When you reference a template. So this dialog window looks pretty much the same from an earlier release of Civil 3D. I'm going to go ahead and edit and choose a DWT, and I'm going to, for this example, actually back out, cancel, and just show you that I don't have any styles already set up in this drawing. I just have the standard, which is a default. When I attach a reference template, and I'll do so by selecting my templates and just loading the Civil 3D Imperial National CAD Standards template. When I press open, typically in older versions of Civil 3D, you would just update your Civil 3D model, and every single style that was part of that template would be imported. What you now have the ability to do is manage which settings and styles get imported with a handful of other little additions that I find quite useful. I kind of call this sort of a design center for Civil 3D object styles, because what you'll see across the top is several tabs indicating things that you can import and control the settings for. So that includes Civil 3D styles, the DWG drawing settings for a Civil 3D drawing, the layers that are in a file, and then a couple of other resources, such as property sets, and in the case of these resources, blocks, text, and line styles, or line types, I should say. Specifically with styles, I'll point out, for example, that I can expand out any one of these and simply uncheck or recheck everything in the template. You'll notice that when I do an uncheck all, that if I were to expand out surface styles as the example, you'll notice that some of them are grayed out. You'll also see that if you select one of those styles, you get all the information about that style here on the right-hand side. So you can examine, for example, though it should be quite obvious what the contour intervals for a 2 and 10-foot design style are, you could just double check that those indeed are 2-foot and 10-foot. The reason why it's grayed out is because these styles, for example, are dependent on some drawing settings. So again, this is a function of Civil 3D, but if for a Civil 3D surface, if the default setting includes a style that is a default, you can't uncheck that from the Civil 3D style import if you are in fact importing feature settings. So you'll see that if I uncheck feature settings and I go back to styles, now I can control which of these come in entirely, right? I'm just going to go ahead and import in every surface style as an example and go ahead and press OK and just leave the rest of the information in there. But just note, you can go as granular as you'd like for setting up these different managed settings. So when I go ahead and I press OK and I click Update, what you'll see is that Civil 3D imported those styles specifically, along with anything else that I might have imported. If I go to maybe alignment styles, I didn't import those, so you see that those are still set to standard. All right, so that's that new functionality for you in terms of reference Civil 3D styles. Next, what we're going to do is going to go ahead and jump into some section projection enhancements. And the way these work, again, a lot of these tools are subtle in the way that what they introduce, right? Everybody may know, right, that you could very easily bring in projected items into a Civil 3D cross-section, or a section view, I should say. What is new is the ability to control what information gets input and have a little bit more granularity into how these elements are brought in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select from the Home tab under Profile and Section Views, the Section Views dropdown, and I'm going to go ahead and choose Project Objects to Multiple Section Views. I'll be prompted to either select a sample line or a section view, and I'm going to go ahead and select a section view. Right? Now this information is different. This is simply allowing me to control via either a percentage or a distance how much information I bring in terms of a projection, right? Whether that element crosses the sample line or it's within the projection window, in this case within 10 feet in either direction, it allows me to bring in certain elements that are part of the object types that can be imported. What is new is the ability to control the source display and output display for individual elements within a collection of items. So for example, if I come in here and I just simply uncheck a few of these, let's just deal with, actually, let me leave them all checked so I can just show you a handful of items. Right, for source layers, you'll see that you can have different layers depending on different items. For the source display for Koga points, you'll see that I get some granularity into different point groups, right? So if I have point groups and I've organized them in a way that I want to have them ultimately show up in a cross-section, I can organize those groups and then choose which groups I want or don't want to display. Same goes for feature lines, right? You can choose the type of feature line type based on the style that you want to go ahead and import, and you get a quick overview of how many of these elements are showing up based on the total elements that are part of that category. In addition, for example, I'll choose multi-view blocks. You can see that there are different options for every single one of the blocks that are in the drawing, right? So for every multi-view block that's in here, I can go ahead and choose individual elements to control their styles and or go ahead and just influence entirely at a global level whether they're drawn and crossing or not, as an example. So what I'm going to do just for this exercise is I'm just going to focus in on some blocks and multi-view blocks. For blocks, I'm going to go ahead and choose to display, not show these elements in crossing, but instead in projection, I'm going to go ahead and just add in a utility pole style projection for these utility pole blocks. I'm going to just uniformly tell it I don't want to label, and then I'm going to go ahead and uniformly say I want to go ahead and grab the surface information from the corridor surface that I have built. Concurrently, I'm going to go ahead and select the tree blocks below, and I'm going to also do something very similar. I'm just going to globally control every crossing element. I don't want to see it in crossing, but I do want to see it drawn in a projection style, and that projection style will be reflected via a block I created called Tree Evergreen, since they're all white pines. And again, I don't want to see a label. and I want to go ahead and use the corridor surface as that ability. Once I've made all the changes that I want, I can go ahead and simply click OK, and I'm just going to override all the settings that are in here in place, and you can see that those elements are brought in via the information that I selected, right? So you have a little bit more granular control over what elements are brought in, how they're brought in, and while I didn't go, piecemeal and make different styles, or I should say different blocks to utilize within each of these section views, you could have done so if you had different types of trees, for example, or different types of utility poles. All right. And then last but not least, for section 28, for the 2018.1 releases, we have the corridor rehab tool. Now, the corridor rehab tool, I'm going to show you in two different ways. The first way, I think I'm going to show you an overview of the corridor rehab project, and I'm not going to go ahead and talk at all about the ways that we're going to go ahead and create this. I'm going to do that after the fact. But if I simply select my corridor that I have set up, and let me bring up my selection cycling, and there we go. All right, let's pick that corridor. All right, you're going to see that there's a corridor rehab window, and I'm going to go ahead and just choose the overall corridor window display, and what you can see here is some of those settings associated with it. If I go ahead and I stretch this out, the corridor rehab tool allows you to create a rehab corridor. That is a corridor that's focused on roadway rehabilitation rather than a brand new roadway, right? So the typical tasks associated with rehabbing a roadway, like milling, overlaying, leveling, are brought in directly into this corridor model with a nice interface that gives you instant feedback to the types of ways that you can manipulate the data. What I did, for just the sake of simplicity, and then we'll go and jump into the real model with this, is I'm going to go ahead and just show you a handful of ways that these corridor models are influenced. On the bottom right-hand side, I created a Civil 3D corridor based off of a couple of feature lines. On the left here, you can see that there is a profile view, and of course, on the top, you have the cross-section view. On the right-hand side here, you have several rehab parameters, and I'll dive into those a little bit more in depth shortly. But you can see that I can simply edit any of the information here, and I get real-time feedback about what is happening with the Civil 3D corridor. What I'm going to do to simplify the view is toggle the code set style for that corridor above so that you can see the variety of different styles associated with where I may have milling, where I may have leveling, and where I may have just milling, right? So overlay, milling, and leveling, right? So if I were to make this, 4.5, you can see here that I have several styles indicating where my rehab is happening, right? I have a dotted yellow line that I made to represent where the existing surface is, and you can see where that proposed surface is based off of the existing. All right, so this is just a quick view to show you how this tool works. Let's dive into a drawing where we can actually start this from scratch. And I'll point out that I could probably spend an hour just on this tool alone, but this is more just an introduction to the tool, pointing out that it is a new feature. And then if you have any questions after the fact, I'd be more than happy to walk you through some of the finer details. So if I start a brand new drawing, I'm going to go ahead and just launch into this Civil 3D drawing. I have a survey file that was brought in with the field to finish methodology. So I have some survey figures. I have an alignment that represents my center line of roadway, and I have several survey figures that represent the edges of travelway. What I'm going to do is, suppose that I want to do some roadway rehabilitation between these two intersections. To get started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select from the corridor dropdown inside your Create Design tab, or Create Design panel in your Home tab, Rehab Corridor. This will look very similar to how you begin creating a typical corridor inside of Civil 3D, where I'm prompted for a name, I'm prompted for a corridor style, layer, alignment, profile, and a target surface. So I'm going to leave all these settings default. The only thing I'm going to change is the start and end stations, right? What I want to do is not go through the entire amount. So what I'm going to do is select the endpoint of one of the roadways here. So I'm going to go ahead and choose, let's see, I'm going to choose this endpoint here. And then I'm going to go ahead and choose this endpoint here. Actually, I'm sorry, wrong road. Should have gone a little bit further north. This endpoint here. and then this endpoint down here. Right. So once I've done so, I'm going to go ahead and now click OK. And what Civil 3D will automatically do is present a couple of views, right? Up top, it's going to have a view of my sections. Down below, it's going to have a view of my profile. And over here on the right, I'll have my plan, right? At this point, I get a series of default settings, and it's arranged into two sections, right? Up at the top, I can control the total number of lanes, and I have the ability to go from left lane 1, left lane 2, to right lane 1, right lane 2, right lane 3, depending on how many settings, how many lanes I've included, right? You can control each individual lane's properties individually. And rather than create a fixed lane width, you can see here that the roadway widens. What I'm going to do is use targeting inside of Civil 3D to grab those lanes because they dynamically change. So for the left lane, because I'm moving from, the stationing is from top to bottom, I'm going to go ahead and select my left lane target. And I'm going to go ahead and just simply choose this feature line, and I'm going to select from the drawing, and I'm going to go ahead and choose this object right there, and to make sure that I'm grabbing that survey figure. Let me turn off selection cycling. Let me just scroll down, make sure I grab this one as well. Press enter. What I'll do now is I'll go ahead and I'll press OK. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the right lane, right? Click the left lane, right lane target, choose survey figures, select from drawing, and I'll do the same. I'm going to go ahead and select this object, verify that it indeed goes all the way up within my limits, select this one to round out the extent, and right click to exit. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll press OK. Down below, once I've selected information about my lanes, I can go ahead and choose information about what kind of rehabilitation I'm doing. I could be doing a level only, a mill only, or a mill and a leveling with overlay, right? There are several adjustments for how you want to set the rehabilitation. So one of the more important ones is your ideal cross slope. So ideally, I'd like my lane to be 2%. And what Civil 3D is going to do, it's going to calculate based on all the different control points where you're going to have this minimum, this ideal slope, and where you're going to have some of the minimum depths for overlaying and milling and leveling, as well as some tolerances built in for slope tolerance so that it can fluctuate an absolute value between 2.5 and 1.5, as well as the lane slope, a lane break slope limit. So as you're braking from one lane to the next, what that maximum value is. And then last but not least, a relative gradient limit, which is how much change can happen between two corridor sections, right? It's best to show you rather than keep talking about it. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to click apply, and you'll see that it's applied whatever settings I've specified in here for that corridor. And as it takes me through, you'll see that, again, my plan view, my profile view, and my section view all are updated to represent what it is that I want to see about that section. One thing that's interesting to note is that you may want at some point to update now as you fluctuate and want to see what your proposed change would look like. As you know, you're going to want to create a corridor surface, and I'm just going to simply add the top of that corridor to this, include top lengths for overhang, and just throw a quick boundary around it as out-of-door lengths, right? So then I get my corridor surface, which I think I need to update the style for so that you can see it at 1 foot and 5 foot design, right? And so you can see what changes are occurring. You also are going to want to make sure that your alignment let me select that alignment very carefully. In fact, let me turn on selection cycling to make my life a little bit easier. And you're going to want to just make sure that you include that new rehab surface on the profile, right? So once I do so, you're going to see that it should add a new corridor surface for that region. And I'm just going to style that differently so that you can differentiate between what's proposed and what's existing. Now, I'm not going to tell the group how to, all the attendees how to create a road rehabilitation. That's not the point here. But I will just point out, as you make changes to the different types and you make updates to these changes so that you want to overlay a little bit more than you've milled and leveled, that you can just make those changes apply and all the changes happen in real time, right? What's noteworthy? Well, certainly within the corridor, rehab corridor, there's going to be a rehab manager. This rehab manager gives you the sort of a very granular overview of where there are areas within your range, your corridor, where you've deviated from your ideal situation. So you can see here that the corrected slope based on my mill and overlay values deviated with the corrected slope from outside of my ideal slope range. In addition, you'll get a milling and leveling overview that really gives you an in-depth analysis of what your milling and overlaying is at increments. So I can set that increment to be every 5 feet. I can set this to be every 2.5 feet. And the report will generate accordingly. You can also then export this report out to HTML so that you can bring it into a web browser and or Excel, because you can import in Excel HTML files into Excel, and it'll delineate it correctly. All right. Last but not least, you may get some warnings depending on what your settings are. And you can see here that these warnings show up as the glyphs that you saw earlier. And it's telling me that my maximum slope break is, 0.5% between the cross slope, right? So 2% one direction, 2% the other. I'm having a 4% slope break, and it's just giving me that warning. I'm going to jump quickly over to Civil, my PowerPoint slide, to just point out the types of warnings that you'll get, and then we'll move on to the next topic. There are 4 types broken down into, I would say, 3 groups, right? 2 are for slope, 1 for relative gradient, and 1 for lane break. Effectively, the one that you're seeing right now is the number 4, right? And the one that I showed you in the example, where if the difference between the accepted slope and the maximum is different, then you have a warning for lane break. Going from the top, if your ideal, if your slope difference is in absolute value greater than your slope tolerance. So for example, if I'm at 2% or minus 2%, and I have a difference of, minus 5%, right? That in theory is not greater than 0.5%. So it uses the absolute value for that to check. For the corrected cross slope, right, if that's different from the ideal slope, you'll get a violation there as well. So what I'll just show you very quickly is this manager is pretty nice, where if I scroll down to a section that has an issue, I can just jump to it, right, by clicking it in the manager. And again, I can see here that if my value is different, I'll get a warning, right? And here I have a couple of different warnings. I have my corrected slope to ideal slope, I have a slope difference to slope tolerance, and then I have my lane break violation, right? So all these are reflected directly through this change here. So I did the first 2, the last one, and then last but not least, right, if the maximum relative gradient limit is higher than what you've set, you'll get that warning as well. And again, just remember that the gradient relative limit has to do with how Civil 3D handles one cross-section to the next, the maximum change that can occur, right? So I threw in some labels in here, and you can see that the values are in there. As I change my slope tolerance to a whole percent, you'll see that it updates my model, and now I'm at 2%, and all my warnings go away, but I have a lot more milling and overlaying and leveling material, right? So it's finding the balance of what you're looking to do and what you're doing as far as an engineer goes to minimize the amount of milling and overlaying that needs to happen. That was a very quick overview, probably one of the greatest new tools between the 2018 updates and the 2019. So I spent a little bit more time on this than I would have on any of the other ones that we'll touch upon next. So I'm going to jump over into 2018.2 updates, and these are pretty straightforward. They're broken down into, like, I'll call them 3 groups. The first section deals with how profiles are enhanced in 2018.2. The section has to do with how projection and cross slope styles are updated. And then 5 and 6 are like what I'll call the new stuff, right? They updated new network content, and they updated new assemblies for this release. So I'll jump in directly into those right now. I'm going to go ahead and close this up. I'm going to go ahead and open up my next setting, and that's going to be the profile enhancements. Very subtle, but very useful. If you've ever done any sort of, I imagine, transportation work, you're going to note that if I create a surface profile and just draw this in my profile view using the default settings, what you couldn't do before in Civil 3D is use a right to left method of creating your tangents and curves. So for example, if I'm creating a finished grades profile, right, I'm just going to go ahead in here and just say, alignment name, FG, and I'm going to go ahead and just draw my profile, right? If I choose draw tangents with curves, before you could only go in this direction, meaning I could only go from the left to right. Oops, let me just finish that, right? I had no way of going from right to left. The new feature is the ability to come in here, and if I just remove that tangent, right, and start over, and I'm just going to disable OSNAP, I can now go from right to left, right? Seems subtle and just not very important, but if you've ever been in a situation where you have to create fixed elements to match existing and you want to go from a certain direction, you couldn't in previous versions of Civil 3D. What I'll also point out is that for offset alignments, you no longer have to deal with, tangent, what's the word I'm looking for? If you had a profile curve that you were offsetting, that's a parabola. Civil 3D in previous versions tessellated that parabola into individual segments, right? So what the new feature is, gives you the ability to create an actual parabola offset profile. So I'm going to do that pretty quickly. I'm just going to create a couple of offset profiles, and I should have actually just double checked that when I did so, that I enabled the profile dynamic profiles, and I think I did, right? Yeah, they're already automatically created, right? So when I created this alignment, you can see that now I can go ahead and just go to surface profile. Let me just add the existing proposed ground. And I'm going to go ahead and just draw this in really quickly. You're going to see that the offset profile that's here, right, is also, if I add the labels, import label set, and I'm going to go ahead and choose complete, you're going to see that this is actually a parabola as well. So these offset profiles in prior versions of Civil 3D would just be a bunch of little tessellated or segmented tangents that emulated what this profile, offset profile should do. All right, subtle, but again, very powerful. In terms of section enhancements, right, really it comes down to the ability to add ways that you can show section styles inside of your section views. So you can see here that within my plan view, I have this pressure network with a four-way elbow, not really an elbow because an elbow is only two directions, but a T intersection, not a T, I think it's just called a four-way intersection. And you can see that the style that I've included in here, if I select right-click and go to projection and crossing settings, you're going to see that there's this ability to now just have a section view. What that actually does is it creates just a cross-section of the elements as they're being cut in the drawing. You can also input in a projection view, right? If I draw the projection view, you'll see that that projection style gets thrown in. What is also useful is pointing out that if I change this back to none, is that the style that drives how this looks for a section and crossing is driven by the element's layer properties, not the style properties. So that was a common request. So for example, if I put this in crossing, in projection, and I enable that to be drawn, right? This display is controlled by the style. So if I right click and I go to edit projection style, right, how this appears is driven by, actually, sorry, if I right click and go to, I could have sworn I chose the style, and let's go to basic. And if I edit that, you're going to see that this display, right, is driven by this layer and ultimately this property. The nice thing about this crossing marker style that has this special bracket, bracket section bracket, is that whatever style is associated with the object or whatever layer the object is also reflected in the crossing object. So you have a lot more flexibility in how you show this information. So just to give you an example, I'm going to go ahead and just start scrolling through the various layers, right? And you can see as I'm selecting a layer that has a different color in plan, it's also updating in section. Subtle, but extremely powerful in your ability to be flexible and control how this information looks. Last but not least, for new updates is what I'll call the updated pressure network content. And these I'm just going to do via slide, right? For both imperial and metric content, a bunch of new things were added to Civil 3D 2018.2, and of course, those carried over into Civil 3D 2019. In case you're curious where these information resides, if you're not too familiar with pressure networks, I'm going to use my everything search, and I'm going to search for SQL light files. Those are the types of files that Civil 3D uses for your pipe catalogs, and you can see here that for 2019, I can open up that path, and there are my various ones that have been added. Inside of these SQLite files, if you open up the Civil 3D Content Catalog Editor, you're able to import that information in. It's in my other window, so I'm going to go ahead and just open up one of those. I'm going to copy this path. I'm going to go ahead and place it in this search, and then I'm going to go ahead and open up, if I go back to my slide deck, for example, right, the ability to have some new gate valves in the HDP, right, high density polyethylene, right? So if I go ahead and I open up that in the content editor, you'll see that if I go to valves, I have some of those new gate valves that are in there, and they include, and it's maybe a little bit difficult to see on the screen, but you can see the new gate valves that are included, right? Take a look at what's been added. It certainly can help you so you don't have to create any new content. Both Imperial and Metric have new content, so I'm not going to spend any time showing you the metric since it's a direct reflection of the Imperial, just in meters and millimeters rather than feet and inches. The other last new thing are a series of new sub-assemblies, right? So if you're in Civil 3D 2018 with the update of Civil 3D 2019, there's a wealth of new sub-assemblies that do a great many things, right? Channel drains, tunnels, guardrail, crib walls. Take a look at all the things that are in there. And I put these paths on for you. If you want to have these paths, just reach out to me and I'll directly email them to you, or you can just do a quick screenshot of my slide right now. But in essence, if you want to go ahead and take a look at those, again, I'm going to go ahead and just do a search for PKT files, right? And you can, if I sort by folder, you're going to see that the 2018.2 and 2019 PKT files are all in here, right? There's, I think, about 64 items, right? And if you look at the images, you can kind of get a sense of what they do based on what the images show you, right? In order to import a Civil 3D packet file, right, you're going to have to go to the Insert tab and import sub-assemblies, and then you can create a new palette, and you can simply select all those PKT files in one go if you so chose, right? Let me just copy this. Let me just copy this path. Right-click, copy full. And let me paste that in there for you. And you can go ahead and select all of these at once and simply add them to your palette, all right? And then experiment with them as you see fit. And with the last 15 minutes that I have, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the new specific to 2019 enhancements. And 1 and 2 are specific to Civil 3D, 3 through 5 are specific to AutoCAD, and 6 is really a reflection of InfraWorks and Civil 3D compatibility. So with the profile geometry enhancements for Civil 3D 2019, let me go ahead and open up a Civil 3D, a new drawing. And essentially what this new tool allows you to do is to create a vertical element, a vertical curve based on a specific hold point, right? Those of you who have worked in Civil 3D know that it's a little bit difficult to anticipate. You got to bust out the calculator and analyze your parabola if you're looking to hit a very unique specific point inside of Civil 3D on a curve, right? Crest or sag. So what was introduced into Civil 3D 2019 is the ability to add a new type of fixed vertical curve. And if I go to my fixed vertical curve dropdowns and I go to more fixed vertical curves, you're going to see that there is an option now for fixed vertical curve, parabolic, high-low point available to me. So when I select that, what Civil 3D is going to do is it's going to prompt me to select my vertical curve, right? I'm going to go in here and select that endpoint. And then it's going to prompt me for whether this is a crest or sag, since this is the bottom of a valley where I'm trying to maintain a minimum distance over this culvert. It's going to be a sag curve. And then from an engineering perspective, you're going to bust out your green book or a calculator and calculate out your K value, right? Based either on riding comfort or any other criteria that you have. So I'm going to enter a K value of 30 feet, and I'm going to go ahead and enter in a curve length. I think if I did a quick napkin calc for riding comfort, it came out to 250 feet. And you have that curve in there. Now, you can certainly edit this curve to manipulate it to, change its curve length while maintaining that minimum height, right? So I can go ahead and make changes to this. If I want to connect it to the trailing tangents, right, I can manipulate this tangent data a little bit, maybe eyeball it so that it lines up a little bit better. Obviously, if you have to hold certain points, hold those points. But what you ultimately want to do is be able to control how this information ties in. And the next thing to do would be to add a floating line, right? Floating tangent through a point. So I can select the floating line through this point, and as long as I maintain, a certain value, I can go ahead and connect it in that direction, right? So again, this is maybe not the most ideal from an engineering perspective, but you'll see here I can simply, if I can control my mouse accurately, I can simply add a floating tangent, and you'll see where it gives me the red mark indicating that I can't go any further and maintain tangency. And then if I so choose, I can start connecting these points and adding some additional vertical curves based on my design, right? And so I'll just enter in a new vertical curve there, right? Again, I'm not saying that this from an engineering perspective is ideal, but the whole point is that you have this new vertical type that you can introduce into Civil 3D 2019. As I pointed out way earlier in my slide deck, this is the only new feature that is not backwards compatible with Civil 3D 2018. As far as CAN support, I don't know too many of my clients that do railway design. I myself never really delved much into it. I did some minor work with the MTA as an engineer, but never actual rail design. In the case of what's been introduced into Civil 3D 2019 is the ability to control CANT within the sub-assembly composer, right? So if I go to my PKT files and I do a search for, I think it's called rail, and it helps if I, so if I do a rail double check, let me just copy that full name to my clipboard, go to File and Open, and I open up that PKT file just so that you can see a rail subassembly, right? You're going to see that there's now this CANT tab here inside the subassembly composer that allows you to control CANT for a rail subassembly. All right. Again, I don't deal with this too often. If you do and you want to know a little bit more about it, feel free to reach out, and I'll be more than happy to do a little screen sharing session and show you this, and maybe we can talk about how this might be useful for you. The next three elements are all AutoCAD specific, though one has a great purpose for Civil 3D. So I'm going to go ahead and close my subassembly composer, and I'm going to go ahead and just jump into Civil 3D, and I'm going to go to open up the batch save utility. Now, this utility is outside of Civil 3D, and you can see if I do a search in my Windows program files, I get this batch save utility, right? A quick rundown on what this tool does. Those of you who already know that Autodesk released the Script Pro, which utilized the AutoCAD Core, like the non-GUI interface for AutoCAD to allow you to run scripts. This is basically that, but a little bit more refined. So what it allows you to do is it allows you to run several scripts. It'll automatically detect whatever Civil 3D versions you have on your screen. It comes with a predefined set of scripts, one for quick saving and one for cleaning, right? Purging, auditing, that sort of thing. And you can include any target folders that you want. So for example, if I go to my downloads and I have a series of files here for batch saving, you can see that if I have some Civil 3D files in this directory, and I'm just going to browse over on my second monitor just to show you. Hopefully I didn't actually make changes to this these drawings so you can see it happen in real time, right? So yeah, so you can see these files here are around the 15 megs, right? If I run this clean script utility for Civil 3D 2019, I'm going to go ahead and just close out of Civil 3D 2019 so I can run this utility. And I'm not going to save any of my drawings. No, no, no. And last but not least, no. All right. So if I'm in this batch utility, what I can do is specify which directory I want to go ahead and do. I can include all directories. I can remove certain directories. I can set certain kinds of settings. I'm going to just make these a little bit easier to utilize. And I can go ahead and just choose to clean those files up, right? Presumably, I've set all my defaults correctly, and all I need to do is click Start. And what it's going to do is it's going to launch Civil 3D in the background, and it's going to go ahead and clean these drawings, right? And hopefully this won't take too long. And you can see that they're complete. And if I do a refresh on the screen, Well, I didn't. It failed. I think I've reached out my timeout. I may have some things open in the background. I think I have other versions of Civil 3D, and of course I do. But effectively, what it would do is it would clean out these drawings, or you could use this to quick save. Those of you who know that there was an issue with Civil 3D files where performance got degraded as you started using these files. There was a hotfix in place, but even after the hotfix was implemented, you still needed to open and save every one of your drawings. So the batch save utility allows you to do so. You can also go through and use the Windows Task Scheduler to assign this to run on a series of folders or files on a certain time of day, right? So those of you who are not familiar with the Windows Task Scheduler, there's an Autodesk white paper on how to configure that. There is a small typo. So for those of you who are in the audience, I'm going to go ahead and send a message out along with the attendees showing you how to use that white paper to schedule these in real time. All right. The drawing compare. That again is AutoCAD specific, and if I go back and I launch Civil 3D 2019, you'll see that I'll give you a quick example. Effectively, the way that tool works is you select two drawings, and what it allows you to do is graphically compare the differences between those two drawings, right? Whether they're AutoCAD changes or Civil 3D changes. So if I start off with a nice blank drawing and I go over to the Collaborate tab, you'll see that I can go ahead and click on DWG Compare. I can go ahead and select the drawings that I want. So I'll compare Site 1 and Site 2. And when I click Compare, it's going to go ahead and run through the analysis. It's going to represent a new drawing on my desktop in my Civil 3D drawing that I can then save. And it's going to graphically compare the two elements, right? So you can see here that I can disable what's common to both, and I can analyze via color coding, green and red, the differences between the drawings, right? You can see that it's gone through and added a revision cloud that I can step through all the individual changes that are in that drawing. And so it gives you a very quick and easy way to understand which elements are which. You can choose the draw order from what's drawn on top. You can choose the different colors depending on what's easier to visualize for you. And once you're done, you can go ahead and save this drawing out as a completely different drawing for discussion, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and call this, I'm going to leave that there and saved. Right, so pretty easy to do. My colleague Reed Addis did this exact demonstration, I believe, in the What's New in AutoCAD 2019. That's video that's on our knowledge base. So definitely feel free to watch that video as well to get a little bit more in-depth analysis of this tool. Since I'm in here, I'm going to go ahead and back and go to the Collaborate tab and share this, right, as a shared view. Is the last item on the list, right? And basically what it allows you to do is to create a new shared element that you can go ahead and create. So I'm going to create a new shared view. This is going to publish my information to my BIM 360 account, and I can share that information and then use that once that's done, right? You can see here I did one previously. You can go ahead and expose that online and view it in the browser and send somebody a link to that drawing to view, right? They don't need any sort of Autodesk information. They don't need an ID. They don't need anything like that to simply view it. So you can also collaborate, turn on and off layers, right? It gives you a very easy way to share information with the non-engineering and non-architecture crowd. And then last but not least, as I have one more minute on the before the top of the hour, I'm going to just point out that InfraWorks component roads come into Civil 3D as corridors, right? So I don't have InfraWorks open. Let me go ahead and launch that. And I'll give you a very quick example of how that looks. And while that opens up, here we go. I'm just going to pull up a very quick, let me pull up a finished product, right? I'm going to go ahead and just open up a drawing because I don't want to go through the actual export process with you, but just show you what it may look like when it's finished since we're at the top of the hour. So here's a Civil 3D drawing. I'm sorry, a Civil 3D drawing. Where am I? An InfraWorks model. This is Brooklyn. This is Industry City in the borough of Brooklyn. I went in here and for a, well, it looks like I didn't save that view. I had thrown in a component road in this vicinity. Oh, no, there it is. I'm sorry, I lost myself. All right, so I threw in a component road into this area connecting these two roadways. You can see here it's a roadway. It's specifically a component road. You can see here that I can insert additional component road elements that would emulate what are known as sub assemblies within Civil 3D. And the nice thing is that I can now push this model directly into Civil 3D. The one catch is that you need to be closed out of InfraWorks for that to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out of InfraWorks. And I do have a couple of minutes. So let me just open up a standard drawing with nothing in it, show you where that tool is, right? So I can go to my, I believe, insert. Yeah, my insert tab, and then you see that you have an option for InfraWorks. None of this has really changed, but now I can go ahead and choose that model. One thing you want to do is make sure that I set the coordinate system for this drawing. Let me actually do this. I'm going to set this to New York 83, helps if I type in the right fields, NY 83, North American datum of 83, Long Island foot zone, which is what New York City and the 5 boroughs is. Save this drawing, and let me go back and open up that InfraWorks model. And you'll see that that information comes in. I'm just going to go ahead and import the entire model in. And once I do so, it's going to, have chosen to select a certain range, an area of interest, as it were. But instead, I'm going to go ahead and bring in the entire model. And what the new feature is as soon as this imports, goes through, you'll see that the Civil 3D corridor was generated for the component road, right? So if I zoom in here, right, a lot of this information would have come in anyway, right? You have some polylines, you have a Civil 3D surface for all the digital elevation model, but more importantly, you have a Civil 3D corridor based off of that component road, right? So an assembly is generated based off of what I used as a component road, as well as a corridor is generated in Civil 3D.